Community School District, the past Associate Superintendent of Waukee Community School District, and also a prior middle school teacher in Ankeny. Dr. Buck is a first-generation college graduate in his family. He's married and the father of 6 children, ranging from 9 to 19. So a very busy person. And also now that school has started, I suspect he really is busy. But please welcome and give your full attention to Dr. Bradley Buck.
Well, good evening. I'm going to start my comments with a focus on Cedar Rapids, and then there's maybe a little bit of conversation about what might be helpful from a state level perspective as you have opportunity to interact with candidates as they sort of come through our state. So excited to be here, thrilled to be the superintendent of schools for Cedar Rapids. Really, what we're focused on in Cedar Rapids is excellence for all. So our driver in our conversations is what are we doing to meet the learning needs of each and every one of our students? And we're really addressing that from 2 perspectives. The 2 perspectives that we're using to address that conversation around excellence for all are innovation and continuous improvement. And so when you think about those 2 sort of big ideas, on the innovation front, if you're familiar with our Cedar Rapids context and a lot of what's going on, we have the Big Idea School, and I can invest as much or as little conversation in some of these ideas as might be helpful. But we have the Big Idea School, which is essentially a school kids can go to, primarily juniors or seniors, and the idea is they get assigned projects or they choose projects that are their passion point. So companies turn in project ideas, and then students can review these project ideas and then see if that's something they'd be interested in investigating more. And generally they're just outside the capacity of a company. So a company may be working in a certain area, they would recognize they have needs just beyond that area, and then this is maybe an opportunity for students to get engaged in that way. We have options programs at Roosevelt and Jefferson, and essentially what happens in that, I'm more familiar with the Jefferson idea. So we took 3 teachers, random set of students with an emphasis at some point on potential for at-risk characteristics, put them in a group, allowed those teachers some flexibility with kids' schedules. So instead of saying you have this course, this time, this course, had some flexibility to say if we need a little more English language arts time today, we could do that, mathematics, science, that sort of thing. After the first year of results, significant improvement in student outcomes. So we're excited about that, and we're trying to replicate that with another set of teachers at Jefferson. Other innovation. Oh, you probably saw in the news the Johnson STEAM Academy. We're very excited about Johnson STEAM Academy and what that means for kids. And people, oftentimes talk to people about STEAM or STEM. Science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. And I will say to them, they'll say, I'm so excited about STEM. And I say, great, what's STEM? And they always kind of look at me like, well, it's science, technology, math. I said, well, weren't we already teaching that? So I think the real difference, at least in my mind, is trying to transition the conversation to kids thinking of themselves as scientists, as mathematicians, as innovators, as entrepreneurs, and really taking those content areas and thinking about them in ways that knit them together in really interesting and important ways, and engaging kids in learning activities in the classroom centered on 21st century skills. Collaboration with their peers, creative and critical thinking, those kinds of things that we hear again and again from employers that we need to see more of out of kids. And so that's sort of what I think of relative to STEAM. The kickoff was a blast. We had a bubble machine, and kids were excited, and it was good. What else? Oh, Metro STEAM Academy. So if you're familiar with Metro Alternative High School, and the Metro STEAM Academy is a little bit different deal. It's not the entire school. It's a portion. It'll be about 1/4 of the students, at least to start out with this year. And really, one of the components of their STEAM Academy that's most interesting, I think, if you're familiar with the NCRC, are you all familiar with NCRC? So this National Certification for Work Skills. And so you can take this NCRC and it'll give you bronze, silver, or gold in terms of your workplace readiness. And so they'll have the kids take that at the start of the year and get a sense for their workplace skills, so that as they're working with kids in these various environments, they can talk to them about these are the attributes and skills you've already demonstrated relative to the workplace, If you want to move to silver and gold, these are the kinds of things you're going to need to invest your time in. That's a lot different conversation to kids as employers want you to be a good worker, so be a good worker. Okay, what's a good worker? Well, with NCRC and some of these tools, we can really hone in and identify the kinds of skills and attributes kids will need as they ultimately move into the world of employment. And we also have, and one of the things I'm especially excited about in addition is Built by Pros. Are you guys familiar with Built by Pros? A number of the trade associations are working together, and they made a significant investment into that. And so what we know is this, and I'm going to speak a little bit of heresy and blasphemy. This always gets people a little bit mad or a little bit happy. So let's do that right now. And we'll have a moment with each other, okay? I really don't believe that a four-year degree is required of every student for success in the new economy. I think every child should be prepared for a four-year degree if that's what they would choose to do. But there are a ton of living wage, high-quality jobs with certifications, credentials, two-year degrees, and those types of things. So one of the things they're doing at Metro in tandem with Built by Pros is taking a look at apprenticeship opportunities, opportunities in the trades, and those are really exciting jobs from, at minimum, the standpoint of they are generally recession resistant and they are offshore proof. So these kids get good jobs, right? So to the extent that we can give kids an understanding of all of the types of work that are available to them and opportunities, I think Metro could actually lead this conversation in Cedar Rapids, which is another exciting thing to think about. On the continuous improvement front, so there's about 6 or 7 things. If we do them well, we know that we'll get improved outcomes for kids. A focus on the content. So in Iowa, we have the Iowa Core, so rigorous academic content and process expectations for kids, high-quality assessment frameworks, research-based and effective instructional practices. So I mean, there's this sort of list. And one of them I would really like to at least mention to all of you is the importance of community. So in returning to Cedar Rapids, one of the things I've been most thrilled about is the number of organizations that are dedicated to providing services and support to our kids. Big Brothers, Big Sister. I mean, we could go, it is absolutely, United Way, I mean, we can go down this list. It is absolutely amazing the level of commitment that exists in Cedar Rapids to provide additional supports to our kids. And we know that community is one of those 6 factors that are likely to help lead to improved outcomes. So with that, I stand before you as a champion of Cedar Rapids, a cheerleader for Cedar Rapids, and I think it's a really great place, and it's only going to stand, I think, to get better over the next. I think previous leadership and this board have really set the district up to move forward in exciting and positive ways. So with that,
Thanks for questions.
yeah, I'd happy to do questions. I'd happily talk at a national perspective level too, if you want a little bit of idea about what you might talk to candidates about just from a national perspective. And by the way, if you want to talk budget and state, I'd be happy to do that too. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that's exactly where I'd like to go. He's talking about budgeting, the governor's veto.
Yeah.
What is our plan to get more money out of the legislature?
Yeah, so I don't know if y'all know this. It was mentioned quietly in my intro, but I used to work for the governor. So, you know, you kind of smile walking in, right? So Republican governor. But anyway, so in terms of the budget, here's the biggest concern I have relative to schools and budgeting. 2 really important things happened over the last few years as far as schools and budgets that are really important. And one of them is sort of a ticking time bomb out there, and then the other is just sort of this chronic underfunding. So the first one is this, and this is going to be a little more technical than I intend, but you'll get the gist of it. So what used to happen, we used to have what was called allowable growth in the state. And allowable growth was the increases in state funding that happened per student. So we're a student-based formula, an enrollment-based formula. We get about $6,300-ish per student right now. So as schools get funded, they take a look at the number of kids that you have and then do some multiplication, right? It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. And allowable growth, when we used to be in an allowable growth conversation in the state, when schools you'd hear schools are going to get 4% allowable growth. So essentially what happens is you take that number per student and add 4% to that number. In an allowable growth environment, a portion of that was state tax and a portion of that was property tax. Okay? So what happened there is, and then a couple years ago, we switched to state supplemental aid. And a lot of that conversation is, well, it's just a change in the word. So we used to call it allowable growth, and now we call it state supplemental aid. There's a super critical thing that happened in that, and it went from, instead of it being a portion state tax and a portion property tax to fund that, it went entirely to state taxes. And the reason that that's critically important is, as the state economy grows, and schools get it, and so we're half the state budget, right? And so that's one of the things that always gets touted, well, we're spending half the state budget. Well, we should be. Sorry, look at that. Woo! Yeah, I thought I'd get one amen, not even one. Anyway, that nuance is important because every percentage increase in cost is that much more expensive out of new money from the state. So instead of a percentage cost the state about 22 or 20, these are made up numbers, so don't write them down. And if you repeat them, I'll say I don't know what they're talking about. But it used to be about 23 or so million in state money and then about 7 or 8 million in property tax per percent. Now it's about 30 million per percent. So do you see the important nuance that happened there? Now, as you say, if you say 4% state supplemental aid, that's truly 4% times, and it's all state tax. So that is a ticking time bomb out there. What will happen when we go into a recession again? Because at some point we're going to have a recession again. That's just sort of how, right, ebb and flow of economies. When we do that, there is no, so property tax, this is like stocks and bonds. So you had some of both, and that was kind of a buffer in budgeting times. What's happened now is we've taken out essentially half of our portfolio, and when we get into lean economic times again, there is no buffer. There is no buffer because it's state aid, it's purely state aid as a number. So that is out there, and if you were to talk to folks and start to advocate for something, one of the things I would say is a return to allowable growth would be a good thing for the state. That's. Well, it's nice. And then the other part of it is just this sort of general trend to giving less state supplemental aid. Schools have added costs. We oftentimes hear that we should run like a business, but what I would say, and I would adamantly say this, we're not a business. Our inputs are every kid that comes to our door, which is the most precious resource the parents have, and they send it to us. They're kids. And so we take them all, and that's one of the beauties of America, right? We take all the kids. So we don't control our inputs, and we have no desire to control our inputs. And we have increasing costs just like everybody. And so to the extent that people say, it gets confounded fairly quickly, right? So this is a teacher union problem, and this is fill in the blank on whose problem these things are. Well, I have a potential solution to this. I want to hear a potential solution. This is what I think. So in the last session, the Republicans came forward and said, we're willing to give schools more money, but you have to get into Chapter 20. So Chapter 20 is the code that guides union work, right? And you have to get into Chapter 20 and take out the consideration for, so right now we can't consider our ability to pay as part of our negotiation. So if we negotiate with Teachers Association and we go to arbitration, we can, ability to pay, the school district's ability to pay is not a consideration for the arbitrator. And that makes, generally speaking, makes Republicans angry. That doesn't seem, from a business perspective, that doesn't make any sense. If you don't have the money, why would you pay your employees? Okay, again, not a business. So what I wonder about that is, what's been frustrating to me is the economy has clipped along at 5 or 6%. But increases to schools have not clipped along. So generally what has happened over time is schools have gotten a little less when the state wasn't doing as well and got a little more when the state was doing better. And I think most people, this is the Lindale Mall test to me. You stop 100 people at Lindale Mall and you say, hey, should schools get a little more when the economy's good and a little less when the economy's not so good? What do 100 people at Lindale Mall say? That seems reasonable, right? This is reasonable. But that's really not what has happened. We have been in 5 and 6% increases over the last few years, and it has not tracked like that. So what I wonder about, we used to have in this model, we used to have economic indicators in this model, and the economic indicators determined what was then allowable growth. So if the economy was doing well and the economic indicators of the economy was doing well, schools got some more money. If the economy wasn't doing as well, then you got a little bit less money. And that was scrapped years ago. But to me, that's the counterpoint of the conversation about ability to pay. Because then in the good times, the money is better and the system seems to work. But it's not set up like that. So right now we get in, and you guys in the legislature have experienced this, it's just annual thumb wrestling now, and schools are just sort of in the center of it. So those are probably the two things that sort of stand out to me in terms of the school finance conversation. So it's not all about the money, because you don't just throw all the money in the world at something and assume it improves, but there is a commitment, I think, or intended to be, that schools be funded at a reasonable level. So, yes, sir. Sir, please.
In your presentation, you mentioned STEM and skills assessment and so on. And I wonder about what you see the Cedar Rapids schools doing to prepare people to be lifelong learners, to be active participants in the political process, to be good citizens, to be contributors to society and the culture, and not just be drones who have learned some skills and will have to go back to school when they're 30 to learn different skills.
Yeah. So I've been kicking this idea around in my head. So I'm an education nerd. I lay awake at night worrying about like this. I love school. And anyway, so you're going to hear that next. So I've just been, as I've been laying awake at night thinking about these things, and we talk a lot about college and career readiness. So one of the outcomes of schools is this notion of college and career readiness. And generally, college and career readiness has been defined as content and process skills. So it's, do I know enough math, and can I do 21st century skills? But what I'd really like us to start a conversation around, and I promise this is going to get to your question. What I'd really like us to start a conversation around in Cedar Rapids is when we talk about college and career readiness, we need to talk about content because kids need to have the content knowledge to matriculate through the system. They need process skills. I think we also need to start talking about passion. So what is the child's passion? What do they want to do and become? My dad always said growing up, and it didn't make sense to me at 16, but it makes sense at 46. Find something you do that you love, because you're going to spend a lot of time doing it. You didn't really think, but now that makes a lot better sense, right? So I think we need to integrate passion. If we're going to talk about college and career readiness, content and process skills, getting into the passion conversation, and helping kids have a plan. And then I think a dimension of that too is, so a dimension is exactly what you're describing, because our entire role is not just to make them workers, it's to make them citizens and workers. And so to the extent that that's part of a college and career readiness conversation, part of being college and career ready is that you're also, a citizen prepared to navigate a democratic society. So I guess in that's a long answer to my desire is that we start to open up the conversation about what it means to be college and career ready, and it's something beyond being a worker. I don't know if that's helpful, but yes, ma'am.
At the beginning of your presentation,
Yeah.
you said something about young people, juniors and seniors, working on projects that industry provides.
Yep.
So what steps do you take to ensure that they're not just people who specifically?
Yeah, so they have that conversation frequently, and they talk about projects. And if a kid gets into a project, because that's honestly one of the first things I thought when I sort of heard about this conceptual idea. So it really is framed as support. So they provide adults on those sites that provide support to them. So it really is more like a guided internship. That's really the sort of intent of it, rather than a simply doing the work. Yeah, because I agree with you. So they stay on top of those. And if a kid gets into a project and they find out it's not for them, they have the right at any time to leave that project. So, yeah, right. And then they just pick a new project. So there are kids intermittently starting a project. They get in there, they figure out it's not really for them, not their passion, whatever it is. They get out of that project, and then it just stays in the pool because another child may think that's their cup of tea.
How long do they have to
So.
stay before they can go?
Yeah, I don't know the number, so I don't want to say, it's a few weeks. So they wanted to give an honest effort, but they also don't want them to stay in it if it's not something that's, kind of lit their fire. So and I could get the big folks for you here. That might actually be something worth doing, is getting some of our big teachers here to one of these meetings and really talk to you about what they're doing, because I'm giving it like the world's worst overview. Because if you go do it, it's awesome.
I work at the same office Iowa Big is at.
Oh, okay,
And
yeah.
the first day the students were today. There were 60 students,
Yeah.
all excited about projects, and they're finding out what the passion was for each student and like trying to figure out where they place. They've got a staff of educators there
Yeah.
that are actually working one-on-one with the students and really figuring out what they are like. I'm not involved with Big, but I'm watching it as an observer, and
Oh,
it was
great.
like, I wish I had that in high school.
Yeah, that's
It was
exactly
really
what I
cool.
think about it. So I would have loved to have done that in high school. Yeah. So, I don't know. Yes,
Well, I'm
ma'am.
listening to the conversation about this big project, and it seems like a lot of it's working with industry leaders and things like that.
Yep.
And you're talking about STEAM too. Is there an arts component to this where students who are passionate about the arts, do they have, avenues for projects too within this framework?
Oh, yeah, it's completely project dependent by industry, and some of them are advertising and marketing and kind of a variety of things that you can absolutely get into. My sense is we have more projects and options for kids than we have kids that are currently in the system. So, yeah, it's cool. It's amazing. And again, I'm doing a terrible job. Trust me, it's amazing, right? Trust me. Yeah, I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
What, I'm from north of Center Point, so my kids graduated from Center Point, Urbana.
Oh.
We get a lot of kids that open enroll from Cedar Rapids to Center Point, Urbana. So, it's great for us, not so good for you. What do you guys plan to do to try to keep your students being your students instead of letting them come up to see us?
Yeah, so that's a very fair and good question. So just to give you a sense of the scale of it, our net open enrollment out this last school year, was 777. So we were negative 777 kids out. So it's not, it was, again, these are made up numbers, but it was about 200-ish in, and then whatever the math of that is out to get to 777. And what has happened over the last 5 years relative to that is that trend line is going like this. So 5 years ago, it was 250 or something. These are rough numbers, but it gives you a sense for the scale. And really, a lot of our conversation on the innovation front, innovation because it's awesome and cool stuff, and innovation because it sets us apart. So Johnson STEAM Academy, one of the things that was interesting about that is that's a neighborhood school. So we have a neighborhood school concept in Cedar Rapids. We also added an additional 2 teachers to that and opened up 50 lottery spots for kids who are not neighborhood school kids to come to that school. And we ended up with I think it's 14 or 16 of our open enrolled out kids lotteried into Johnson. So we are trying to attend to this and we're talking internally about doing some survey and calling work and saying to parents, so what would it take to get you back to Cedar Rapids? What's driving that migration? So, because Cedar Rapids is an amazing place. If you want to take advantage of all the opportunities in Cedar Rapids, and that is Center Point Urbana, I'm sure is a very nice place too. I'm not saying, but you have access to AP, clubs, sports, all of the stuff. Show choir, the cult. I said I'm a show choir dad, so wow, that got dicey there for just a second. I love show choir. Okay, yeah, yes, sir.
Number one, we forgive you for your association with the governor.
Thank you. I don't think you have though, because it's just a little bit edgy. It's a little bit edgy.
Number two,
yeah?
Some of the neighborhoods in Cedar Rapids seem to be lacking parenting skills. And I think that should be something in high school that is stressed.
Interesting.
Not to become a parent in high school.
Yeah. I'm not sure what to say to that. Thank you.
Parents, how to raise kids if they're going to have them.
Fair.
those kind of things. So they know arithmetic and English, and that's fine.
Yeah, so your point is fair. So I read a post by a high school kid a few weeks ago, actually a different school district, but a high school kid, and said, you know, I can do Algebra 2, I can do, I can't remember what it was, technical writing or something, but nobody's ever told me how it works to get a mortgage. Nobody's ever told me how, you know, they start, I mean, to kind of your point, yeah, to your point. So where do we learn that in school? And I think that's something worth thinking some more about as we move forward. So we have like a child development course typically, but it's not required of all students, for example. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
We've got school board elections coming up, and as a voter, I have heard nothing about candidates or people running, or, you know, is there anything tomorrow night?
Yep.
There's very little information in the media or anywhere else about the elections coming up.
Yeah, so the Gazette did a number of sort of smaller pieces on some of the candidates, and then they did a one-day thing, but I would agree, that, I mean, it's just a one-day thing. And then tomorrow night, there's a forum. Sounds like you guys are going to talk about that. Okay. Yep, yep. Yes, sir.
We appreciate you coming, sharing your thoughts. Know you've got a lot to think about.
Sure.
But you did mention a national perspective. Seems like every 8 years, we go and turn a corner from Nation at Risk, National Education Goals, No Child Left Behind. Do you have some speculation of what might be smart in the next administration's Department of Education that would hopefully raise our international rankings?
How would you feel if the Department of Education was just eliminated?
Holy smokes! See, this is
to the question?
yeah. So the amendment to the question is, how would I feel if we eliminated the Federal Department of Education?
Well, I remember that in 1981. Ronald Reagan
Yeah.
attempted that. I assume with No Child Left Behind, that's not going to happen soon.
No. So let me, so just from so this would go back to my days as director, just talk a little bit about sort of the national perspective. One of the, if nothing else could get accomplished, reauthorization of ESEA is absolutely vital to Iowa schools. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act, so it's been in existence for, well, since Johnson, I think. Gets re-upped intermittently, and it takes various forms. Its most recent form is No Child Left Behind. We have gotten all the good that there was to get out of No Child Left Behind, and now we are in the onerous, ridiculous parts of No Child Left Behind. So it was supposed to be reauthorized about 7 years ago, and one of the reasons that's important is when they designed that law, it was ultimately said, in order for schools to avoid being on school in need of assistance or district in need of assistance lists, you ultimately are going to have to get to 100% proficiency of students, which I love as a stretch goal. And then it's nice to live in the real world. So, so I think every kid deserves our trying to deliver on that, but it's a big deal, right? So in 2002 or so when that passed, I used to joke. My oldest daughter graduated in 2014. And I always used to joke, man, it's going to be awesome. When she graduates, every kid's going to be proficient. Sort of like funny and snarky, and not funny now. So Iowa is a non-waiver state, so we live under all of the onerous, draconian parts of the law. So our school district in Cedar Rapids, 100% of our schools are now on school in need of assistance lists because now we are at the 100% proficiency expectation. And we're not there. So in that case, there's all kinds of things that have to happen behind the scenes, and it's prescribed in the law. So all that stuff is prescriptive. None of that is actually research-based and proven effective in getting to improved outcomes. So if I were to say national perspective, reauthorization of ESA is critically important to Iowa schools. I think the current administration has gotten too tight in how they deal with schools and states. I think they've kind of gone overboard. Education's a funny one. You can be in a room of, I would guess this is generally Democrats, and yeah, isn't that, yeah, and so you guys are thinking, so how'd you let this guy in tonight? I get it. So
that's because we got no place to go.
That's right. I'm just a man without a country. So I think they've gotten too tight on some of their expected outcomes, like some of the things they've done with teacher evaluation, for example. 50% of a teacher's score based on one standardized test, that's not just, it's not only dumb, it's unethical in my, anyway. So I think they got too tight on some of these things. And my real hope, if we get an ESEA reauthorization, would be that we come back sort of a little bit more to the middle. So we say, here are some things, because they are sending a fair amount of money. So I understand they would have some accountability in that system. Here's some things we have to have, but here's where states and districts have some flexibility in making this come to life. And it's not a stick and carrot type model where we just smack. Because it's really not helpful to continue to say that Cedar Rapids schools are failing. When people understand the criteria is 100% proficiency, okay. So I think that's the national perspective for me is can we get that, can we get ESEA reauthorized and can we do it in a way that adds some flexibility back to the states? In fairness to Arnie Duncan, so I've had a chance to interact with him a little bit. In fairness to him, we have made some progress on some things nationally that we hadn't made much progress on for a long time, student graduation rates and some of that. What I wonder, though, is if there had been a little more flexibility in there, would we have been even further ahead? So could he put our feet to the fire with a little bit more flexibility? So, yes, ma'am.
I just have a comment. I have kids ranging from 6 years old and then to 17. So,
Great.
And a 10-year-old. And when I grew up, my parents were divorced, and I originally started off in Central City, and then I actually graduated from Jefferson. There's tons of opportunities in Central City as far as like sports and stuff, but I had like a 2.3 grade point average at Central City. When I went to Jefferson, it almost shot up to a 3.0 because I had a reading disability. So my point is that smaller classrooms. Now that I have children and I'm in Marion District,
Yep.
the concerns is Rebay has 26 kids in her kindergarten class.
Sure.
How do you feel, what is your stance or whatever on classroom sizes? Those are a concern of mine. I mean, as far as sports and stuff like Marion, I mean, I think the sports and the bigger schools and across the board, it's harder for kids. I mean, you almost have to be great to be able to play, actually play. Versus if you go to Central City or Center Point, you have more opportunities in sports. But I wouldn't say maybe they would have better special education as maybe the bigger cities. I don't know if that was true when I was growing up, but I don't know. I just wanted to know about the classroom sizes because that was concerning to me when I said, how many cupcakes do I need to bring for our birthday? 26. I'm like, wow, that's kind of a lot.
They let you bring cupcakes?
Well, but no, from Hy-Vee.
Oh, from Hy-Vee. I was going to say.
They won't let me bake them. So
Yeah, I was going to say, because this is one of my favorite stories, and I'll get to your question, I promise. My favorite story, so I'm a kid growing up in Cedar Rapids schools. I'm in about 3rd grade. My birthday, some years, falls fairly close to Easter. So just think about this now. Mom made homemade cupcakes, cream-filled middle, awesome. Green frosting on top with Easter eggs, right? So we took them to school, we celebrated Easter, my birthday, nobody thought anything of it. Anyway, so life's different. So, and probably for the better, especially on the Easter front. Anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, class size. So class size conversation is a complex one, because I'll give you the research and then the sort of the challenge. So the research around class size is fairly clear. Class size doesn't matter. Essentially from 15 or 18 to 40. Teacher instructional practices tend not to change, whether they've got 23 kids in the room, 25 or 27. Actually, one of the most famous quotes around that is, class size reduction is the most expensive, least effective strategy that the United States has used for improvement.
But then how can you explain my situation? I mean, I was able to be in a classroom with one teacher, special education teacher, with 4 kids, versus like 15 that were stapling their arms and actually were in special education, should have been, and more behavioral than what we have now. I know that's back then and things have changed, but it hasn't changed probably that much.
Yeah, so the challenge in that is the phrase I just said, which is ticking off probably 2/3 of the people in this room, and you don't believe it at your core. And so the funny part of that is, the research is clear, but this is one of those classic things in life where the research doesn't matter to people because what they really want is class size reduction for their kids. And what I would tell you standing here as a superintendent is, I think to the extent that we can keep, so we have numbers we work to keep in Cedar Rapids. So in the earlier grades, it's like 23 or something. That's the target number. Fourth and fifth grade, it's like 25, and then it starts to creep up a little, because as kids get older, they get a little bit more autonomous and all that good stuff. And I think we should adhere to that. So what I want to speak loudly to is, while I've said the research, I also understand the parental sort of interest and conversation around that, and absolutely honor and respect that. So what you won't hear me is up in front of a microphone saying, I think we ought to have 30 kids in a classroom, because I don't think we should. I think we should pay attention to class size, okay? Because there's lots of pieces to it. So just because the student achievement outcomes don't change necessarily, what about the interaction with other kids, the process skills, opportunity to do creative lessons, blah, blah, right? So
bullying?
Yeah, so I mean, pick an indicator. Yep, fair. So in Cedar Rapids, we're working on that. And I think one of the things that, and they're actually fairly even. So if you went, so the neighborhood school concept in Cedar Rapids, the numbers are actually about where we would best hope they would be in terms of what we're shooting for in terms of class size number. But here's what I would say relative sort of to all of that. And my wife and I have had the conversation you described about 5 million times, which is, do you have more opportunity in a smaller school or do you have more opportunity in a large school? And it's absolutely based on what you want your opportunity to be.
And I think it depends on the child.
Absolutely. Because if you want to start at Kennedy in basketball, or even contribute on the team, you're going to be a pretty doggone good basketball player. And in most cases, you've probably been on an AAU type traveling team since you were this big, and traveling out of state since you were this big, right? And now you're that big. So that's one way to look at it. There's also tons of clubs and other things that it's very difficult to recreate in smaller schools. And so if that's really sort of your bent, then there's maybe more opportunity from that perspective. So my wife and I have this conversation dozens and dozens of times, and we have a resolution, bigger school district, but that's just for us, right? So if I could just say one more thing on the class size thing, not just Brad Buck, but almost all superintendents in the state, I won't say all because there's maybe an example where this isn't the case, but almost all this is going to be the case. I am going to be an accidental adversary to the community here in about 4 or 5 months. And the reason I know that is this: if we continue to get funded at 1.5%, we will have to make reductions. It's simple math. Here's the money that comes in. Here's your increase in costs, which are reasonable. Honestly, we had a really positive settlement with our Teachers Association this last year. They were sensitive to sort of what was happening with the budget and settled at a super reasonable number. But part of that came with a lot better number next year. So 1.5 this year, 3.5 next year, which I don't think 5% over 2 years is giving anybody the world, honestly. So we're going to actually be if we get 2% allowable growth. Remember where this conversation sort of began. If we get 2% allowable growth, that's 2% increase in our money coming in, and we're going to have 3.5% increase in the majority of our costs. 78% of our costs or something's payroll. Don't you love these numbers? 80% of statistics are made up on the spot. I've been on the job like 6 weeks. Just these numbers are sort of, they're close, right? Just roughed out. But the gist of the story as it relates to class size and these other things, I'm going to end up an accidental adversary with the community because we're going to have to be thinking about what does it mean if we have 3.5% increase in costs and 2% or whatever that money coming in is. Something has to give. And so I'm going to be the guy standing up saying, here's some options for the types of things we may have to consider. And I'm going to be punished loudly, having done this before in my life. And I'm going to be the guy saying, I don't want to make cuts. We hired all these people for reasons because they value add our organization. So, but I also have a responsibility to balance the budget. It's against the law to run in the negative. It's actually against the law. So to the extent that all of you can be advocating for a better increase in state supplemental aid, the representatives, and all respect to the representatives, will not listen to me. And they won't listen to me from the perspective of what do they know I'm going to say? What am I going to say? We need more money. Yeah, I get it, right? I mean, they know what I'm going to say, and they think this guy's getting paid to say it, okay? To the extent that they get emails and phone calls from people that aren't people like me, superintendents and stuff, that resonates with them. That's been my experience. We saw it in some legislation over the last couple of years, I think, could give examples. But with that, to the extent, if it resonates with you that it'd be nice if schools got a little bit nicer increase over the next year, I would appreciate that part of the conversation.
Because they don't listen to teachers either.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, well, so here's so the reality of that is, well, yeah.
Okay.
Is this all videotaped? Oh my gosh, I've been more candid than I
Okay, how about-
intended.
Just one more question, because I know we can talk about this all night long, but this is the first week of school for Dr. Buck, and we got to give a little bit of break. So one more question. Then
Sunny.
Great.
Well, I actually had 2 questions.
Yeah, very good. Oh, I'm sorry, hit it. Yeah, I'm not trying to.
When they give out tips, which is a big thing that you're doing nowadays, do these people who receive the tips, do they still pay into the school district?
No.
Okay, that's one question. Second
Good question, Doreen.
Oh, yeah.
Good question.
I want to ask about, was so amazed to hear the Cedar Rapids kids have computers, junior high, high school, and they're running a current top-of-the-line program, so these kids have an opportunity when they go into college. Memoir, my grandson, they're running an antiquated, old system, and they don't have computers to take home, what's going to happen when these kids come on up? Cedar Rapids is going to be so far ahead. What's going to happen to Marion and Linn-Mar?
Well, what I'm hoping is we see a change in the graph. Actually, if we could just, I can honestly say, standing here 100% today, I have no interest in working to poach kids from other districts. My real desire is that the kids that live within our boundaries of Cedar Rapids, that we provide whatever it is for them, that they see Cedar Rapids as the great place that I think it is, and that they want to stay. And honestly, if we could get to that part, I really have no interest in trying to, but we are being aggressive in the ways in which we're engaging with our kids. One, because we want them to have a great education, but two, because we'd like to keep them and then get some back. I mean, we're just, yeah, so. One more?
Yeah, I just wondered, you were commenting on advocating for funding. It's something that, at least in my experience, the general public doesn't realize is that when Alliant Energy raises their rates 20%, and we have a 2% allowable growth, that's kind of something has to give. And even though we are really top heavy in the employees, we're not paying anything for our raw materials. I mean, our students come into us free, but we service them, and that's why we have to have so many people. When all the funding of, gas for our buses, buying buses, all these things become so expensive beyond just the teacher pay. Too often in the legislature and other places, we hear teacher pay, teacher pay, teacher pay. But it's a big picture. And we're not going to get high-quality teachers if we're going to pay minimum wage. Just as we can't put kerosene in our buses, we have to put good gasoline in there. So you're going to pay for what you get, and I think the investment in our children are really important. So when you're advocating, I want you to tell people, it's a big picture. It's not just teacher pay.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, thank you. The word I think that's most important through this whole thing is, this is an investment. We are investing in the future of our state. And if you don't wonder about what an investment looks like, I went through this system and this community and state invested in me, and now I'm the superintendent. There was an investment made there. And to the extent that kids continue to need to be invested in, and there's a system to support them to do that, it's an investment. It absolutely is that. I think that's a great word. So with that, I don't know, I hope this went okay. I'm not sure yet. I can't quite tell you. But anyway, it's all right. I was going to leave with the Ronald Reagan quote.